Okay. Alright, it's up. So, this video is intended to be a supplemental to my main video about the anti-war movement during the Mexican-American War that should already be up on my channel. So, if you haven't seen that yet, I suggest that you do so, because that should get you familiar with what the war was and why people protested against it. I very briefly quoted this article in my main video about the anti-war movement, but it's really worth reading in full. This is an editorial published by the North Star newspaper on January 21st, 1848. The North Star is the newspaper that Frederick Douglass was an editor of. Douglass, of course, being the famous escaped slave who, became a master orator and writer. He fought against slavery and racial discrimination for all of his life. Truly an interesting figure in American history. Although I will say that this video's title is a bit clickbaity, because I'm not positive that Douglass himself wrote this article. It does seem to match with his writing style, except it could have just been written by somebody else at the North Star, and just edited by him. That being said, without any evidence to the contrary, I think that this was written by Frederick Douglass. But whatever the case is, without further ado, I will read this editorial which criticized the Mexican-American War. From aught that appears in the present position and movements of the executive and cabinet, the proceedings of either branch of the National Congress, the several state legislators, North and South, the spirit of the public press, the conduct of leading men, and the general views and feelings of the people of the United States at large, slight hope can rationally be predicated of a very speedy termination of the present disgraceful, cruel, and iniquitous war with our sister republic. Mexico seems a doomed victim to Anglo-Saxon cupidity and love of dominion. The determination of our slave-holding president to prosecute the war, and the probability of his success in wringing from the people men and money to carry it on, is made evident, rather than doubtful, by the puny opposition arrayed against him. No politician of any considerable distinction or eminence seems willing to hazard his popularity with his party, or stem the fierce current of executive influence by an open and unqualified disapprobation of the war. None seem willing to take their stand for peace at all risks, and all seem willing that the war should be carried on in some form or other. If any oppose the President's demands, it is not because they hate the war, but for want of information as to the aims and objects of the war. The boldest declaration on this point is that of Honorable John P. Hale, which is to the effect that he will not vote a single dollar to the President for carrying on the war until he shall be fully informed of the purposes and objects of the war. Mr. Hale knows, as well as the President can inform him, for what the war is waged, and yet he accompanies his declaration with that prudent proviso. This shows how deep-seated and strongly bulwarked is the evil against which we contend. The boldest dare not fully grapple with it. Meanwhile, the plot thickens, the evil spreads. Large demands are made on the national treasury. to wit, the poor man's pockets. Eloquent and patriotic speeches are made in the Senate, House of Representatives, and state assemblies. Whigs, as well as Democratic governors, stand stoutly up for the war. Experienced and hoary-headed statesmen tax their declining strength and ingenuity in devising ways and means for advancing the infernal work. Recruiting sergeants and corporals perambulate the land in search of victims for the sword and food for powder. Wherever there is a stink of iniquity or a den of pollution, these buzzards may be found in search of their filthy prey. They dive into the rum shop and gambling house, and other sinks too infamous to name, with a swine-like avidity in pursuit of degraded men to vindicate the insulted honor of our Christian country. Military chieftains and heroes multiply, and, towering high above the level of common men, are glorified, if not deified, by the people. The whole nation seems to wonder after these bloody beasts. Grasping ambition, tyrannic usurpation, atrocious aggression, cruel and haughty pride spread and pervade the land. The curse is upon us. The plague is abroad. No part of the country can claim entire exemption from its evils. This may be seen as well in the state of New York as in South Carolina, on the Penobscot as on the Sabine. The people appear to be completely in the hands of office-seekers, demagogues, and political gamblers. Within the bewildering meshes of their political nets, they are worried, confused, and confounded, so that a general outcry is heard. Vigorous prosecution of the war. Mexico must be humbled. Conquer a peace. Indemnity. War forced upon us. National honor. The whole of Mexico. Our destiny. This continent. Anglo-Saxon blood. More territory. Free institutions. Our country. Till it seems indeed that justice has fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. The taste of human blood and the smell of powder seem to have extinguished the senses, seared the conscience, and subverted the reason of the people to a degree that may well induce the gloomy apprehension that our nation has fully entered on her downward career and yielded herself up to the revolting idea of battle and blood. Fire and sword are now the choice of our young republic. The loss of thousands of her own men, and the slaughter of tens of thousands of the sons and daughters of Mexico, have rather given edge than dullness to our appetite for fiery conflict and plunder. The civilization of the age, the voice of the world, the sacredness of human life, the tremendous expense, the dangers, hardships, and the deep disgrace which must forever attach to our inhuman course, seem to oppose no availing check to the mad spirit of proud ambition, blood, and carnage let loose in the land. We have no preference for parties regarding this slave-holding crusade. The one is as bad as the other. The friends of peace have nothing to hope from either. The Democrats claim the credit of commencing, and the Whigs monopolize the glory of voting, supplies, and carrying on the war, branding the war as dishonorably commenced, yet boldly persisting in it and pressing on. If we have any preference of two such parties, that preference inclines to the one whose practice, though wicked, most accords with its professions. We know where to find the so-called Democrats. They are the accustomed panderers to slaveholders. Nothing is either too mean, too dirty, or infamous for them, when commanded by the merciless man-stealers of our country. No one expects anything honorable or decent from that party, touching human rights. They annexed Texas under the plea of extending the area of freedom. They elected James K. Polk, the slaveholder, as the friend of freedom, and they have backed him up in his presidential falsehoods. They have used their utmost endeavors to crush the right of speech, abridge the right of petition, and to perpetuate the enslavement of the colored people of this country. But we do not intend to go into any examination of parties just now. That we shall have frequent opportunities of doing hereafter. We wish merely to give our readers a general portrait of the present aspect of our country in regard to the Mexican War, its designs, and its results, as they have thus transpired.